Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for coming, Alan. I'd just like to introduce you folks to Reverend Dr Alan Niven, who's the Director of Research here at Stirling College. My predecessor as lecturer in pastoral and spiritual care and pastoral theology and spiritual care. And how long have you worked here, Alan? What's your...
Oh, well, I came out of local church ministry in 1994, so then was teaching from that time onwards.
Okay, yeah.
So the courses developed, the interest developed, and so on. Yeah.
So your relationship with the college is an extended one, and
Yes.
and your relationships with people in the pastoral care world in Melbourne and beyond is significant.
Yeah. I think one of the exciting things for me was moving beyond the very important area of formation within the church and formation of people directly involved in ministry, but then to begin connections with other people who are doing significant ministries in healthcare, in aged care, in palliative care, or in other forms of care, and to actually get those two worlds to connect was something that I was really concerned about.
Fantastic, and that's an ongoing journey.
It is.
The church's experience and the way the university's developing its courses and so on.
Yeah, because I think both sets of ministry cohorts, they actually need each other to inform and encourage each other, but also to learn from each other.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I think both sides lose a little bit of direction. Anyway, that's just where I come from. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, the focus of our conversation today is about ritual, and particularly in the context of ageing. And we know that we're reading your article and so on as part of our course, and so we know that you have a particular interest in ritual and its role in pastoral and spiritual care, its role in the life of faith and life in general. I thought maybe we'd start with you as a person and what led to your interest in ritual, and maybe even go back. Can you remember the first ritual in your life that had real significance for you? And would you like to share a bit about that with us?
There were probably two sets of rituals for me from my childhood. One was around my dad's job, really. He was an airline pilot, and in those days we moved a lot. We moved from Scotland to Ireland to the Isle of Man to the north of England to the south of England. And so for me, those significant rituals were actually family leaving rituals, leaving friends, leaving schools and so on. And I think that was probably the first time in my life I connected with grief as a process. And grief as little cards that are all stuck together. Yes. And so the leaving rituals, everything from packing to reinvesting yourself in a new house or a new school. I think my mother, probably more than my father, was better at that. But my father used to do it through family meals. He would cook, and we'd have these farewell meals, and then we'd have these arrival meals with all the rituals. So I became, I think, retrospectively aware of how much the leaving and starting rituals were part of my life. The second part was in my late primary but early high school years, between the ages of 10 and 13. I was part of an Anglican choir boy, frills and ruffles and all that, in an Anglo-Catholic church, which was loaded with rituals, things the Catholics had stopped doing many centuries before. And so morning song, evensong, and the whole liturgical calendar and the ritual of procession. I mean, it was a huge choir and a very well established church. So, and then when my voice broke, I was made redundant. So, it never really had anything to do with the church again until I was about 22. So, but I have found in recent years through the practice of ministry the importance of not so much of religious ritual, but ritual process. Religious ritual is important, but a broader ritual process has been part of a value-adding imperative to pastoral care, be it with family, be it with couple, be it with individual, be it with grief, loss, ageing, dementia, whatever. So, an all points relevance.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, just to take you back slightly, you spoke just very briefly then about ritual about grief as little bits of paper stuck together. What were you referring to then? That's an image that strikes me as...
Probably change the metaphor a little bit. Like you pick up a pack of cards. There's the grief card for me, maybe now about a leaving or a loss. And I pick it up, and lo and behold, it's attached to another one. Or there's another card, and lo and behold, it's attached to another one. There's a different face, because it's a four of spades or a jack of clubs. But they're still all attached, and they're in the same pack of cards called grief. And so it was the connection of grief, I think.
And it's a beautiful, simple metaphor for suggesting that as human beings, we're not simplistic, we're complex.
Yeah.
And all of our experiences intersect.
Yes.
And
yes.
so in that sense, to speak of simple grief, perhaps, as opposed to complex grief, might be a bit of a misnomer.
It is.
Is grief always complex in your experience, or?
My understanding of grief is it's always complex in theory.
Yeah.
But when you actually begin to listen to it, it simplifies itself into story.
Yes.
And so the theory becomes story, the story becomes part of a journey for someone, and then as a pastoral carer, it's where do I sit with that part of the story.
Yeah.
So I'm not making, hopefully not making things too easy, but I think complexity can be broken down into story.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the way we frame
Yep.
What our experience might be, however complex it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you eventually went through a process of re-entering the church and obviously training theologically and becoming an ordained Church of Christ minister.
Yep.
And as part of that role, as you've just said, ritual was very, very important. How did your interest in ritual grow through the practice of it in ministry towards an academic interest in the formation of others as pastoral carers and so on?
Yeah, interesting question. I think it's probably the churches I was involved in were new churches, so they're new communities, they were young families. So in one sense, the life cycle was sort of a bit unrepresentative, but we did have older people. But I think it's the engagement pastorally with everything from weddings, funerals, marriages, baptisms, or child dedication services. I realised that it was in those points, particularly young families in the area, the birth of a child or the loss of a child, or the journey around disability involved in the birth of a child and so on. I was realising that what I had done in terms of my training, but also what I'd added in terms of some counselling training and family therapy training that I'd done, just didn't quite get there sometimes.
Right.
You know, that people were beyond words, people were beyond even rationally or irrationally thinking through what was going on. And sometimes we needed to just stop and pause. And I think that's when my old ritual formation in the Anglican Church, but also my family rituals began to kick in and think, well, we need to do something else here. And so use of symbol, use of ritual, use of other things as supplementary processes to, if you like, the counselling element, that was really significant.
So really becoming up to your eyeballs in other people's lives and the experiences they were having and the process of integrating their experiences into living and into faith and so on was very much a part of what led you deeper into that sense.
It was, and trying as always to follow, because it's not always easy when you're busy, but just the pastoral discipline of listening and enabling narrative to inform what we're doing together, and then the overlay of collaborative work on this, so that, because the dominant story of ritual in the church has often been, we'll paste it on, or here it is. You know, here's your wedding, here's your baptism, here's even your healing service, you know, or here's the anointing of this baby. But to what degree was it possible to engage just the imperative of the pastoral dynamic, which is about listening and empowering, the shifting of the guest and the host motif, and to enable this to be a joint exercise. I think that I loved, that I enjoyed, and I think in one sense it was countercultural in those days, in the 80s and 90s, because usually people came along to the church for whatever, and it was done to them. And so I think my pastoral formation saved me from just moving into a ritual presenting process into a collaborative ritual making process. I think that was what happened.
Less a formal process and more of a dynamic, creative process, responsive to the context that it was in. Can you, without identifying anyone, can you remember a ritual that you participated in with someone that might be a good example to share with us of the function of ritual? How what the kind of end result, if you can talk of a ritual having an end result in that sense, I guess it's an ongoing process. But can you remember a particular ritual that stands out for you as something that had a significant impact in a person's life?
I think it's strangely it would be the ritual of revisiting, I was invited to visit an elderly gentleman who was in hospital. He was dying. He was in a terminal phase. This was in a context of no family visiting him. This was at the invitation of a neighbour and one of his best friends. And so I went along and met this guy. And I'd go and see him every day, maybe for 10 minutes or 20 minutes, depending on the time, his energy levels really. And at the end, I said, let's call him Adam. I said, Adam, is there something you'd really, really want to do? And he said, yes. He said, yes. He said, I want to go and sit in my home just for one last time. So some people might not think of that as a ritual, but it is, because it's a revisiting of his spaces and places and the things important to him before he died. So anyway, and we could never do it now, but they pumped him up with something, and in the town I was in, Werribee, the hospital was about 200 metres from his house.
Oh, fantastic.
So I wheeled him to his house, talking to him all the way, and he's telling me stories about Scotland, right, which is where he's from. And we get him in there and sit him down in the chair, and he's surrounded by all the photos and the images and so on of his life, and photos of his dog. And he, 1 minute he's in the chair, and he's quite happy. He's had his minute, and he looks around, and it's just this deep peace drops all over him. So we get him back in the chair and bring him back to the hospital. And so in one sense it was really a very moving thing for me, but literally moving, but it was also a teaching of me about asking a person what they would like to construct out of their need at the moment. And so we developed that. Even the sitting there in silence, there was a moment where there was this silence, even in that short time, which was the deepest silence I've ever seen, heard, experienced, or been in, where it was just... And then we came back. The next day, I actually said to him, because he knew I was a minister, I said to him, Adam, would you like to have communion? And he said, what's communion? As a 70-year-old who'd never been to Sunday school as a kid from that era in the 80s.
Non-religious.
It was. His response was, what's communion? There's not all room for some theology, but I said it was a meal that Jesus had with his friends. And then he said, would he even have a meal with me? And I said, he sure would, Adam. And so the next day I brought communion along, and I think he died about 3 days after that. But that taught me also the fact that rituals are strung together. So there was so much in the taking of him to his home about hospitality. I was his guest in that place. And then at a time and a space in that silence, we were both guests of something. And I would have a view of that, and I don't know what Adam's was. But also the next day, the theme of guest and host came through again. So it was probably intuitive. I don't think it was me being religious or feeling need to have communion with Adam or whatever, but there was absolutely no problem in offering it. But there was also no need to explain it. And anyway, when we had communion, it was the same silence. It was a remarkable thing. So anyway, that sort of experience led me to what goes on in this stuff. You know, what happens? What happens? You know, you've got a young 32-year-old pastor and a 72-year-old Scotsman who's never been to church, and yet we both share in these two rituals which changed the world. And it was... So anyway, so that led me on to people like Victor Turner and the whole ritual anthropology stuff, and etc., etc. And I ended up having far more books on ritual than any self-respecting Church of Christ minister probably, or anybody else probably has, including prayer books as well, because I don't want to knock that out of the equation. I think all of those formal things are absolutely beautiful. But it's a bit like a lot of people don't visit them. They're beautiful palaces that people don't visit, but they have their function and they do it.
That's right. So. They turn up at important times of life, and there's familiar patterns and recognisable activities and objects and so on that can carry people if that's deep in their particular consciousness.
They turn up like the rallies at Christmas. They go away again. But it's important while you're there.
One of the things we've been talking about as we've sought to explore together the dynamics of aging and what spiritual care means in those encounters is that it's a time of significant change and significant loss and reshaping of future story and different hanging our hopes on different elements of what it means to be a person. How do you think, in particular, I mean, I think the story you just told is a beautiful story of the context of aging and ritual and aging. Is there anything else you would say about the importance of ritual for those who are aging? And this might extend, of course, beyond the person themselves to family networks and so on. How does ritual help to carry the community when important people are getting old and changing and losing certain elements of themselves that have previously held great meaning for them?
I can probably best illustrate that by a ritual at the Centre for Ageing Pastoral Studies in Canberra. Jill Drury from, I think, a New South Wales aged care setting in a local town. So local town aged care setting. So it's not a city. And she was responsible for pastoral care. And she was finding that the transition into care for these people, many of whom had been farmers and local tradies and everything, and their spouses, and particularly the women who were in a sense disenfranchised from their homes because their farm home had been their whole world, their nest. Anyway, she had these constant transition dilemmas. So she developed a ritual amongst rituals, and it was a ritual process for which she found a name at the end. So what she did was she took groups of people who were coming into aged care or planning to come into this large village and so on, and she got them to write a book.
Oh wow!
Yeah, she got them telling stories.
Yeah.
And somebody, a bit like in palliative care, people tell apart the stories, and so each person there would tell a story of their farm or their business or even the loss of a kid on a tractor. Whatever it was, whatever they wanted to say, went in this book.
Wow.
And of course, they all heard each other's stories.
Yes.
So, like, Jim, tell us your story, and we'll get it in a book.
Yeah.
And over a period of time, these were edited. And so as people transitioned in, they then had a book launch.
Yeah.
So the ritual was the book launch in the facility.
Yeah.
A cracker, isn't it?
Yeah,
and and they'd invite their grandchildren. So Jim or Mary would come forward and be presented with this bound copy of his book, all his family around him, and they'd do little snippets out of the story. And they do that for all that had come in. And anyway, she named this, there's lots more to the ritual process, but she named this a ritual of transition from independence to supported independence. So, but you can see how complex and how much hard work went into that process. But the building of relationships, the telling of the story, and so the dislocation from their identity, the challenge of that was really ameliorated and addressed, and so relationships were built. So I would use that as the way of, but it actually takes a pastoral person there really to say, I'm prepared to do the work, I'm prepared to listen, develop a structure if you like, and then use it as part of a response to a need.
When you say a pastoral person, it puts me in mind of the question of who is qualified to carry ritual and to hold the function of the ritual in that sense, because often we think, as we've talked already, about ritual as being a function of the faith community. Perhaps we've got a perception of ordained people being those who are qualified to carry us through ritual or so on, or those who are qualified to take funerals and weddings and so on, celebrants. In your view, what does it take? You just said a pastoral person. In my mind, that's a very broad identifier. What do you mean by that? Does a person need to be a particular functionary to carry ritual, or is it a state of being, a way of approach?
Yeah. I think the myth that we're getting rid of is that particular functionaries are responsible for ritual.
Right.
They're the ritual makers, the deliverers, and so on, or authorised. I mean, that has its very limited opportunities, and is still necessary. But I hear what you're saying, that I would assume that there are many people there in, let's say, in an aged care home, from someone who's the cleaner to the in administration, or who has official nursing sort of roles, to be part of how will I respond to this need with the possibility of a ritual. And you see nursing staff do it, and you see where my wife works, when a baby is lost, there's 3 or 4 groups of disciplines that actually are part of the ritual attached to the baby being carefully cared for in death. And so, but that requires a sort of a respect for each other's role. And likewise, it needs to go the other way too. There needs to be respect for people who do have those authorities, because sometimes if it's in a Catholic situation or whatever, there are some necessary things, and the person feels that they haven't had the right things done if they haven't been done in the right way. But there's this whole other world of opportunity. I can best illustrate that. I was taking a service at the Alfred, and there was a lady coming along to that service who came every time she could, physically able to. And it was desperately important she went along to church, the church service. Anyway, some mess had happened, and she'd spilled cereal down her top, and she couldn't go to church in a messy top. And I was watching, and also a dressing had to be done on an ulcer on her leg. So, and I was watching the 3 or 4 minutes of care going on here. There were 2 rituals: the dressing ritual, clothes, and the dressing ritual, wound. And so you had 2 people, both with different disciplines, and there was me with the liturgical ritual waiting, and I wasn't bothered about time. I could truncate things. But I'm watching the 2 of them talking. Now let's get you a better cardia than this, and we'll put this on, because you can't go in like this, can you? So the dressing ritual was performed beautifully and sensitively by that person. Likewise, when the wound was being dressed that had to be done, it was the same. They were talking, they were communicating. It was a need, but it was actually a thing that happens every day. They were every day. But ultimately what it did was care for a woman, settle a woman, and enable her to be in a space. So I would see that as, in ritual there's structure and anti-structure. And whatever happened in the formal service that we had, there was this anti-structure going on here. But which is the anti-structure for which structure? Was that the real ritual there of care for this person? Or was this? Both are necessary.
Absolutely.
And both have their function. But done by completely different people.
It strikes me, the awareness of the dignity of the human person in the rituals you just described is profound. You know, that sense that the ritual process, whatever it is taking really seriously the humanness of this person and their experience, and dignifying them through taking it seriously and walking through with them. It's beautiful, beautiful process.
They were both sacred spaces, which is another element, and both are completely valid, but often not recognised. One might be, and that's a shame, if it's only, if you like, the religious ritual, and not the complementary human sacred rituals.
So ritual actually belongs to all of us. It's part of what we do in everyday life, even if sometimes we don't realise it. But certainly as spiritual carers, we can, whether we're ordained or not, or whether we're employed or not, we can carry people through ritual, be with people, be present to people in a particular kind of way.
And whether that's an individual or a community that's with the present person in the ritual. I first came across this as a student minister, so this is a long time ago, and we were doing a Maundy Thursday service. In those days, Church of Christ never did Maundy Thursday service. And I was a student too, and so and it was an elderly church. I mean, there was nobody under the age of 70, I don't think, in Brunswick at the time. And the night of the Thursday, it was pouring with rain. Glen Lyon Road was 3 inches deep in water. And every single person turned up.
Wow.
Every single person being about 28.
Yeah.
And so they all turned up. And I'd done this morning service meal and, candles for the disciples and jugs of wine. And we had a normal meal, right? And they were thrilled to bits because, I mean, it's a meal. That's why they're all there.
Right,
they're all older people. And anyway, I was just getting to the point where I dimmed the lights and I was going to use the same jugs of grape juice that we'd had in the bread to do the communion meal. And that was my holy moment, as a 28-year-old young student minister. And they're all elderly. So they're a community of elderly people. There's a guy there called Harry. He was crippled with arthritis. He was on the way to incontinence. And in church on a Sunday, they always made sure that there was an airwick thing near where he sat because his clothes were a bit pongy. And so that was Harry. And anyway, I get to my holy moment in this ritual, and there's this scraping of a chair, and from Harry in his hoarse voice, "I gotta go. I'm busting for a pee," right? And I go like this. The community are not bothered at all. Well, they're all of the same age. And they said, "It's all right, Alan. Carry on for a minute. We'll just have a chat while we help Harry out to the toilet." They helped Harry out to the toilet, and he came back, sat down, off again, right? And I must admit, I was a bit upset by this. My holy moment disturbed by this guy, and then I had a long talk with my supervisor about it afterwards. And anyway, my realisation was obviously afterwards there were two holy moments. The beautiful holy moment was the community caring for the community and acknowledging frailty and weakness. But just normalcy, and both can go together. And we had our other holy moment, which was the sense of dereliction, if you like, which was a good theme around Gethsemane and the Last Supper and so on. But that taught me a lot. That was a teaching moment for me about how the sacred or the spiritual can surprise us into equality, into community, and also into understanding. And ritual does that.
Beautiful. Alan, thank you so much for sharing something of your own experience and your knowledge and some of your profoundly important research that you've done over the years. And we're a class of pastoral carers and counsellors, all wrestling with what it means to do what we do as spiritual carers. And what you share with us today has enriched our conversation no end. So thank you very much for being with us, mate.
My pleasure. Go well in your studies.